and good evening. Welcome to Korea Overlander. My name is Ben and it is so good to have you back for today's gear video. That's right. Let me adjust my seat. There we go. Okay, so we're back here on Wednesday for our gear review. And this one is actually based on an experience that me and my kids, or my kids and I, had this past Saturday when we were up at Epson. There was a gentleman, if you'd watched the video before, there was an older gentleman who took a real bad fall, probably bruised up quite significantly his face, probably cracked a tooth or broke it, blood gushing everywhere from his hand, and a couple of really deep marks on his face because he did actually impact rock directly. So instead of talking about boots or those sorts of things, which is what I was actually planning on doing, I wanted to talk specifically about first aid, not what you should do in any particular circumstance, but rather the small little type of first aid kit you want to have with you when you are going hiking. So stay tuned, everybody. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the video because more gear videos and more travel videos are coming your way. Here we go. All right, everybody, welcome back. I'm so glad to have you here, and of course, I'm just glad you're here. So let's get started with our gear video. This is talking specifically about first aid. Now, there's two things that I want to talk about just before we get into what is in my kit. So, first of all, I am not presently certified for first aid. I have been, but currently I am not. In the past, I have done several first aid courses of different variation. I've done 3 different first aid courses, just standard first aid from Red Cross or St. John's Ambulance. But I've also done, in my past, I've also done a wilderness first aid course, which is specific to how you deal with first aid situations when you're not near any hospital. So I've done those 2. Plus, I also do have a water rescue and a lifeguarding certification way back when I was in university. Though I was never formally a lifeguard in your traditional, watching the pool sort of thing, but I did have that licensure. So I did want to say that. But presently, as I said, I am not first aid certified, nor am I medically connected. I don't have any advanced background techniques in trauma care or anything like that, as I'm sure maybe some of you either are, or if you know somebody who is. If you are certified, by the way, and there's anything that I say that's incorrect, please leave a link in the comment down below and I will make sure to highlight that. Or I will update the video because certainly I don't want to present any wrong information. Okay, now that we've got that started, let's dive into our first topic, which essentially is, what does first aid mean? Now, I've got some notes over here on my computer, so I am going to be eyeing over there, just so you know, because I don't want to misinterpret or misrepresent any of my information. So, first of all, what is first aid? First aid is what we do either for ourselves or for another person, and we are specifically not a medical professional, okay? So you could kind of see first aid as something that is amateur medical care. Let's put it this way. I'm not saying that amateur as in we're not taking it seriously, but amateur in terms of our level of engagement and certification. Okay, that's how I'm using that word amateur, as opposed to a professional who's either a doctor, a nurse, that sort of thing, right? The other thing that I think is important to understand when we're thinking about first aid is, are we able to or willing to actually perform first aid on an individual? The reason I mention this is because some people have certain phobias or certain fears that may keep them from getting into the mix of a situation where somebody is hurt. Maybe they had a blood phobia, for example, or maybe just the idea of screams and pain really kind of sets them away and they're not able to engage in helping a person. That does happen, and you do not need to feel bad about not being to perform first aid should the situation require. I mean, obviously, maybe deep down we'll kind of get our adrenaline going and be able to solve those situations, but it is something to take note of. The third thing I wanted to mention before we get into the kit is to talk about something called the Good Samaritan Law. Now, I had to do a little in-depth research here on the Good Samaritan Law in Korea, and I could actually talk a lot about this because it is utterly fascinating. Not only what the Good Samaritan Law is, but why it was engaged in Korea in the first place. Maybe I'll talk about that on another video because there's some fascinating stuff out there. So stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe for that potential video, which really has nothing to do about camping, but it was a really fascinating rabbit hole that I went down in. But my understanding is that back in 2009, there was a Good Samaritan Law passed by the federal government that allowed people to engage in providing first aid for individuals who were needing it without the fear of being legally attacked or countersued or anything like that. So this is a very, very good thing because obviously in a situation where we find ourselves being required to lend aid, we don't want to be thinking in the back of our mind, oh my God, if I do something really bad, can I get sued? Or, obviously we don't want to be performing things that are so far outside of the scope of basic first aid, right? So I could think of something like a tracheotomy, for example. Yes, we've all seen it on television. Perhaps we might even, be aware of how it's done. However, in a situation like that, it may not be prudent to do that. I'm not saying that it is or isn't. I'm just saying because that is way outside of the scope of first aid, we should still be careful. I know that's an extreme example, but you never know. So the Good Samaritan Law does exist in Korea. It started back in 2009. I believe it was passed 2009, 2010. So it has been around for a while. Now, what is interesting is that I have myself used the Good Samaritan Law 3 times in Korea since I've been in Daegu, not even in Seoul, but in Daegu since 2007. I have had 3 different situations in which I rendered first aid to an individual. All 3 of the individuals were on motorcycles. All three of them were hit by cars, and none of the individuals that were responsible for the incident were doing anything. They were nothing. One of them hadn't even called the ambulance or police yet. That's how lax people are when dealing with these situations. And like I said, there's a whole other aspect to this that I found utterly fascinating. There was a fourth individual that I did also directly witness. This individual, an older man, probably in his mid-70s, was actually hit by a motorcycle as he was crossing the street. As he was green lighted to cross the street, a young guy came along and literally he went up in the air backwards. And I immediately got out of my car and started rendering assistance. My kids were in the back seat watching all of this, so it was kind of weird for them. And when I got back and the police were all dealt with and everything, it was a tense situation. But in not one of those 4 occasions was I ever chastised by either the ambulance or the police staff. And in fact, on all 4 occasions, they were extremely grateful and thankful that I was able to render aid. So I hope that little story, those little vignettes help you to feel okay with doing that in Korea. Now, I did want to get into my first aid kit, and I actually have 2 small kits that I carry around with me, and these are the ones that I'm going to be placing within my backpack. And I wanted to also show you this here. This is a very small little. It's actually a food pack. It's actually a really nice heavy-duty Ziploc bag. I got these at Daiso, and they're 2,000 won. They come in 3 different sizes. The small is 11 by 17. We've got the mediums here, 18 by 20, and the larger ones are 20 by 23 centimeters. Now, these are really, really handy because the plastic is actually quite heavy and a lot more heavier, I find, than standard Ziploc bags. So these, I use these, and they're wonderful, wonderful little bags to carry around. The other nice thing is they do kind of, as you can see here, they carry a lot, but it's in a nice small container and doesn't take up a lot of weight or a lot of room in your bag. So let's crack this bad boy open and let me show you what I have. First thing I want to show you is this right here. Now, these are special types of scissors because there is a dull point on top. Now, why is that important? Well, first of all, the dull point will keep it from breaking through any plastic. It's also, if you fall yourself, that scissor end is not going to end up perhaps jabbing you in the back through your backpack. So something that's dull and yet sharp enough is very good. I find that these ones here I paid about $3 for. And they're not too heavy, but they feel sturdy enough that they're not going to be breaking anytime soon, which is great. So a nice pair of dull-ended scissors. The next thing I have is fabric tape. Kind of looks like this, right? That sort of tape there, and I can take a piece of this right off with my fingers. I don't need the scissors for this. And I got the larger, this is a 2.5 centimeter strip, I think, or maybe a 3 centimeter strip. And I did it because that way I could also do this. I could cut them into smaller pieces or rip them into smaller pieces should I need to. So having this type of adhesive tape is very, very handy to have in your backpack. Now, the other thing I have here is an iodine. Okay, now I went with the iodine rather than the hydrogen peroxide. They do both, all right? They do both in terms of chemically washing the wound, whether it's a cut or a blister or anything like that. And I find personally that iodine is a lot less painful when it goes on, because hydrogen peroxide or alcohol can really, really sting. It's great, but it can really sting. I find that iodine is less so. I'm not saying that it isn't, but it is less so. And yeah, something like that, really, really handy. Now, of course, I do have standard Band-Aids, all right? Standard Band-Aids, as well as I have a pair of gloves. Now, these gloves are, from a North American perspective, having these types of gloves are really, really important. Interestingly enough, there are very few doctors, very few people that I've seen who, dealing with bodily fluids in Korea, actually wear these. Now, if you go into an emergency room, they will. If you go into a special doctor's clinic, they will. But I've had blood taken many, many times when the nurses did not place a barrier between their skin and your skin. Now, you know that this is important. These barriers are important simply because you want to protect the other person from any cuts or wounds that you have on your hands. And likewise, you want to be protected from that individual. So having that barrier between fluids is very, very important. Now, I also have these as well. And these are actually wound dressings. They are sterilized. This is something that you want to be looking for. Anything that is in a sealed container as its own piece is very, very helpful, because you know that what is inside here at present is anaerobic, and there's no bacteria or anything in there, and they're good to go. So looking for sterile is really helpful. And there's actually a seal on the back of this so that it is literally sealed in this extra thing. Now, these wound dressings, these here are larger than Band-Aids. As you can see, they're larger than Band-Aids. But these are for deeper cuts, maybe a small or like a surface cut, or maybe even something like the old man had where he actually had punctures in his skin. This here going over top would allow for the area to be protected until he got to a place where he could be properly serviced. So those are good things to have also. The other thing I have is this right here. These are sterile gauze pads. So in this one, this is, how many's in here? I think there's 5. There's 5 in here, and there's 5 in this little one here. These are really helpful, of course, if you're in a situation where you need to perhaps sop up some blood, right? That's what these can be very, very helpful for as well. Now, the last thing in the first bag is this right here, which is a tensor roll. Of course, if you've ever sprained a wrist or an ankle, you'll be very familiar with these. I have 2 of these, both of them. This is the medium size and the large size. One thing about tensor bandages to make sure you're aware of, that when you roll the bandage, make sure the bandage is rolled as a roll out of your, around your arm, for example. So I'm not going to start with the bandage loose. I'm going to roll the bandage, make sure it's tight, and then I will apply the bandage around. Okay, that's how you want to be putting the bandage on. So keep that in mind when you are using these or if you need to use them, okay? And that goes for any size, whether small, medium, or large. It doesn't matter. Make sure those are there as well. Now, I do have one other thing that I wanted to talk about. There's the large one there. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and don't be shy, but women's maxi pads. I know this is going to sound really, really strange, and these are not used for what you think you might need them for, although I guess actually for women, this actually might be a good thing to have on you. However, when I was learning my wilderness first aid, one of the things that they talked about was how do you absorb how do you compress and how do you absorb large amounts of blood if the wound is particularly serious. And one of the instructors said that one of the best things that you could use is actually several maxi pads over the wound. Now I'm just using the small ones, but obviously the larger ones will have more absorbency, but it is something that you might want to consider placing in your emergency pack. Why? Because if there was a large gash, obviously you could use your sterile pads right on there. Then you could take one of those and put it on there, and then you could wrap it with your bandage or with your tape and provide a compress on your wound. So yeah, that's what I have in my actual kit. I'm sure there are other things that I could include. Safety pins, needles, for example, are also things that one might have in a first aid kit. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you think I've missed. And maybe I will consider putting in there if I've got some extra room. Now, one thing I will say about first aid, and again, I do want to say that I'm not medically trained. I have had certification in the past, but there is a standard rule that you do want to follow, and that's the ABC rule: airway, breathing, circulation. And you want to be working in that order. If an emergency happens, the first thing you want to check is to make sure that they are breathing. If they are not breathing, CPR should be rendered immediately. Now, I have heard recently that there were some changes to CPR in terms of the breathing and the compressions. I've heard that the breathing is more important than the compressions itself, but please don't take that as gospel by any stretch. But that's what I've heard. So breathing, airways. So, is there anything obstructing? Breathing, is the individual breathing? If they are breathing, or if they have stopped breathing, obviously then CPR needs to be done immediately. And the third thing is circulation, and that has to do with blood flow. If there is any blood flow, it needs to be stopped immediately. One of the good little acronyms that I learned was the RICE rule. I can't remember what it meant. Rest is the first one. I don't remember. E is elevation. So if there is a wound, let's say something on the arm, make sure that that is above your heart, because what it does is it actually slows the blood flow to the wound, and it keeps you, the blood from leaving your body too quickly. So that's something. I'll put the RICE rule in the comments. Because I just don't remember what the actual acronym stands for, but it's another good thing to remember for sure. Okay, that's all I have with my kit and the things about first aid here in Korea that you might need to know. Again, I'm very curious about what you would put in your pack as far as a first aid kit, or what you do currently carry. I would love to hear that. Thanks very much, everybody. I hope you have a very, very good day. Please don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel. I believe we've passed 60 individuals. Woohoo! We're going strong, so thank you so very much for all of your effort sharing the channel. Take care, everybody, and remember, live life well. Peace, and see you next time.